tonight, I want to talk to you about just 5 things, 5 small things that actually causes every believer to succeed. Now, we go to church and we begin to hear the different stories that we want to hear. We live inside an environment of believing God and of faith and believing what He said. But we looked at it this morning and we saw that there were a number of things that were conditional as far as God was concerned. Things just don't happen because if they were going to just happen, wouldn't they have already just happened? If things were going to happen in your life, wouldn't they have already happened in your life? If God was really going to come through and do all of those things for you that need to be done, then why haven't they already happened? It takes my involvement. It takes my agreement. It takes me to be able to be willing to actually not only believe what God said, but to force myself and force my way through this life in order to be able to achieve those goals which He has given to us before I run out of the time that it takes for me to get there. Because each and every one of us are in a race against time. We race against not how much time we have, but how much time we have left. Every one of us in this room understands our mortality. We understand how little time that we have left to be able to achieve all of the things that God has called us to achieve. So I have these 5 things that I've actually set for us, that if we will embrace these things, that things will be what God has called them to be for you and for yours. Here's number 1. Number 1 is that in order to be a successful Christian and a successful believer, the first thing that must happen is that in your core values, you must walk in absolute integrity. Absolute integrity doesn't necessarily have anything to do with somebody else. It's got to do with you. What are the things about life that are the non-negotiables for you? What are the things that you say that you will not break? Or are the things in your life things that you'll break just in case you think you might be getting something for them? But one of the things about being a successful believer is to actually walk in absolute integrity. Here's what we have, is that any compromise or any failure or every failure in life can be traced back to a compromise in character. Every failure that happens inside of life happens because of a compromise in our character. We begin to break certain things. We begin to allow certain things. We begin to compromise the things that we say that we believe in order to be able to think that we're going to push the football down the field or move the post or move those markers down to a place to where we think that we can win, only to find out that it will allow us to take it all the way to the goal line. And Jesus said it like this when He said that what shall it profit a man if he'll gain the whole world and lose his own soul? You can gain everything that you think that you want to gain, only coming to the end and finding out that you never really gained anything at all. When my dad died, actually in 1988, I remember that we were at the hospital at that particular time, and he was kind of laying there. And of course, if you've never really been in a room where someone died, it's very surreal. It's just kind of different. But one of the things that was funny about it was that when he breathed his last, I thought this to myself. What was he thinking about when he left? Was he wondering about his education, or was he wondering about how much money that he made? Was he wondering about all of those kind of things, or was he regretting those things which he compromised? I've discovered about life that what you do is you live it backwards. You go to the end and you begin to live your life from that point. From where I want to be, I live my life in this direction. And then I go from here. There was a situation that occurred. Can you imagine this? The first relationship that we can see of all time that God ever had was a relationship that betrayed him. That relationship was with Adam and the woman. In Genesis chapter 3, beginning with verse number 4, the Bible tells us this. Take a look. He said, and the serpent said to the woman, he said, you're not going to die. Because he said, has God said that if you, eat of this fruit that you're going to die? She said, oh, gosh, no. She said, listen, even if we touch it, we're going to die. Don't even think about it. He said, you're not going to die. And so here it says, for God knows that in the day that you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you're going to be like him. You're going to know more than you know right now. Because somehow, some way, you're going to be able to get something outside of the relationship that you have with him. You're going to be able to move the markers down the field. You're going to be able to get to a place to where maybe you couldn't really get in your relationship with him, because you need to have other information. You need to have more of an education. Verse 6 said, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and desirable to make one wise, she gave it to her husband with her, and he ate it just as well. And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they saw that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. Isn't it interesting that throughout life, what we do is we actually cover ourselves up in every way that we possibly can? Because every failure in life can be traced back to a failure in character. In 2 Samuel, beginning with chapter 11, beginning with verse number 1, it tells us the story of David. How that David was at a place where what happened was that David, kind of like when it was the time for kings to go out to battle, or the time of the year for them to go, David remained at home. Do you know God wasn't really even bothered so much by the pornography? He was only bothered by the action. God even said to him, he said, you know something? He said, it never even bothered me so much that you would have done what you have done, but you wanted somebody else's wife, not a wife of your own. Wouldn't I have given you more than you even asked? He didn't really deal with the fact that he had seen Bathsheba. He dealt with the fact that he had called her to himself because she belonged to someone else. See, because every failure in life is traced back to a failure in character, and that was David's character. David had a man that was so close to him, Uriah the Hittite. Is anyone even suggesting for a moment that he didn't know who Bathsheba was? Interestingly enough, when this situation occurred, Bathsheba had a grandfather. And Bathsheba's grandfather was David's best friend. And when David had actually betrayed Uriah the Hittite and begun to destroy Bathsheba's life and everything that she had to look forward to, then ultimately, later in David's life, his best friend turned on him. You see, every failure in life is a failure in character. Whatever you are going to be disappointed with in life, it's going to be because somehow you broke your word. Somehow you didn't keep to what you needed to keep to. Somehow you didn't have at the end of your life the same values that you had when you had begun. There was another one here. I'll put up that next one you have. In Joseph, in Genesis chapter 39, we find that Joseph, here he was sold by his brothers, thrown in a hole, made a slave in Egypt, bought by Potiphar, who was the captain of Pharaoh's army. And while he was a slave in the house of Potiphar, Potiphar's wife came on to Joseph. But Joseph actually said, beginning with verse number 7, the Bible says here, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. And he said this, he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he's committed all that he has into my hand. He said, how? Verse 9. He said, there's no one greater in this house, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. He said, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Two things are important for us to know there. Number one was Joseph's relationship with God was greater than his relationship with his flesh. Number two is that Joseph's relationship with Potiphar was greater than Joseph's personal desires. Here he was at this particular time. Let's say for a moment that Joseph's approximately 23 years old. Potiphar's wife had to be one of the prettiest women in all of Egypt at the time, and she smelled really good. It wasn't one of the girls from the neighborhood. This girl had everything. She had power, she had position, and Joseph said, how can I do this thing and sin against God? And we see that Joseph went from the prison to the palace, while David actually had to run from the palace away from the son that had betrayed him. You see, every failure in life can be traced back to a failure in character. If I'm going to be successful, my character must remain intact. Certainly, mistakes happen. People do things that they shouldn't do. But at the same time, realize this, that the law of sowing and reaping doesn't ever seem to go away. It always comes back for what belongs to it, no matter how long that you live. You deal with memories. You deal with decisions that you wouldn't have made because of the things that have happened in the past. So if I want to be a successful Christian, a really successful Christian, I need to stop playing around and understand that my character matters. Not grace is wonderful. Love grace, love the whole deal. But if I'm going to be successful here and now, I need to understand that my character is the pillar, or let's say the cornerstone of the success of my life. So number one is that every failure in life can be traced back to a failure in character. Number two is if I'm going to be successful, I must strategically build a team of people around me. I have to strategically build it. Statistically, and one of the reasons why that I look at secular statistics is because I want to find out what happens in the world, because the very same thing is true in the church, but the church in many ways has anesthetized itself. People actually attempt to go to church so that they can escape reality, not overcome reality. Do you understand that? That's really true. So number two is this, is that I must strategically build a life team, because statistically it is actually now becoming widespread that take your closest 5 people inside your life and your wealth will be approximately the average of the 5 people that you hang around with. Because you cannot rise above the people. You'll never be greater than the individuals that you spend the most time with. That's the reason why that one of the greatest mistakes that we ever make in life is this, is that we spend 90% of our time with people who need us, and less than 10% of our time with people whom we need. There are people in your life that you need. There are people that are going to help you get where God wants you to go. Remember, the greatest thing that God ever gave us, the first instruction that he ever gave us was this: be fruitful and multiply. And you can never multiply by one. You always have to have someone else in your equation. That just doesn't have to do with a physical relationship and physical intimacy. What it has to do is with people at work, friends, people that actually make me better. Isn't it true that there are individuals inside your life that when you come into the same room with them, they're just a bummer. You think, oh God, what am I going to do? Now these people are in this room and oh Jesus, please help me. But there are also individuals that when you walk into the room, that they make you better. Immediately you perk up. Immediately you've got more thoughts. You've got more creativity. Everything about you is absolutely open. You're excited and you're happy and you're blessed and you're everything because that individual's inside that room. So I must strategically build a life team because a life without a harvest is proof I've invested in the wrong people. If there's no harvest going on inside my life, it means that I haven't set the relationships that I need to set. Because once again, I need to spend 90% of the time of my time with people that I need and less than 10% of the time with people that need me. Now the same thing, and it's very, very interesting, is that in Proverbs 19:17 it says, "He that has pity upon the poor lends to the Lord, and the Lord will repay him again." He that has pity upon the poor, he lends to the Lord. Why does it say that he is going to, or that what we do is that we lend to the Lord? Why is it that there is no real benefit out of my relationship with an individual who needs me? Because they don't have anything to deposit inside of you. Now, before you begin to think about that, I want you to go over to Luke chapter 6, and I want to show you something. In Luke chapter 6, in verse number 38, it's a very interesting thing. As you go down into it, it says, "Given it shall be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." Everyone say it. Shall what? Amen. Say it again. Amen. Say it again. Amen. One more time. Amen. Okay, so he said, "Shall men give to your bosom?" Why is it that in Proverbs 19, verse number 17, that the men in that particular verse have nothing to bring back to you, but the men in Luke 6:38 are actually there to multiply you to the point to where it's good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over? Because if in fact we have been tricked, I'm saying we've been tricked, to spend almost all of our time with people that we serve and help, and less than 10% of our time, and it's that 10% of our time are the people who will understand. Oh, tell them we can't make it today. You know what, I'd really love to get with them, but we just really can't. And we go through all of these calisthenics, spending our time with things that put a negative charge into our lives, and so little time actually doing something that will add value to our lives. Now, I'm not talking about for a moment, and please, I understand that this can be somewhat controversial to all of us. But I do understand this, is that if you want to get where you want to get, where I know you want to go, it's actually going to take a real seriousness about making sure that you do it. Not so that you don't talk about it, but that's so you really do it. The Proverbs chapter 13, verse number 20 says this. He says, "He that walks with wise men shall be" what? "But a companion of fools shall be." Now wait a minute. So if I walk with wise men, it didn't say I was wise. He said I would become wise if I did. But he said if I walked with fools, I didn't have to even listen to them, that I'd be destroyed because I would be getting the very same thing that they get. In the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 20, we know the story of Jehoshaphat. We understand that, we see that, 2 Chronicles 20:20. We understand all of those kind of things. We get that, and those are just really cute cliches. But Jehoshaphat had the greatest deliverance in the scriptures. If you remember, he sent out the singers to sing, and when they sang, God sent ambushments against the enemy. Maybe they sang really bad and the enemy just ran. I don't know. But what I do know is this, is that when they sang, there was a sound that was in the camp that actually caused their enemies to desert all of their stuff. And it took 3 days for God's people to gather all of the plunder together and they were completely delivered. But 15 verses later, after that, not years, not tens of years, but 15 years later, or 15 verses later, something happens. So let's pick this up in verse number 34. In verse number 34, 2 Chronicles chapter 20, we'll go to verse 32, I guess. So Jehoshaphat was a good king, following the ways of his father Asa. He did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight. He said, but during his reign, however, he failed to remove, now notice this, he failed to remove all the pagan shrines. And the people never fully committed. They never fully committed themselves to follow the Lord or the God of their ancestors. He said, so the rest of the events of Jehoshaphat's reign from beginning to end are recorded in the record of Jehu, son of Hanani, which is included in the book of the kings of Israel. Verse 30, but near the end of his life, King Jehoshaphat of Judah made an alliance with King Ahaziah of Israel, who was a very wicked man. He became friends with the wrong guy. He decided to go into business with Ahaziah. Now notice there, if you remember, that Jehoshaphat failed to get rid of all of the pagan shrines that were in Israel. And then they refused and did not fully commit to the God of their ancestors. Now keep that in mind, because that's what you see in America. The confusion, the lack of direction, people running around in circles, people not knowing what's going on, people accepting every different faith. They mix all of them together, which actually, if you remember in the book of Revelation, chapter 2, that Jesus said that you have this one thing going for you, that you hate the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. The doctrine of the Nicolaitans, if you remember who Nicholas was. In Acts chapter 6, Nicholas was one of the first deacons that was chosen. He was chosen. He was a pagan who became a proselyte to Judaism. After he was inside of Judaism, he then heard the gospel. When he heard the gospel that he believed, now he's into his fourth transformation. And he decides that following Christ in the way that he was taught initially wasn't right, because he thought it was too close to Judaism. He thought, well, you know, it's easier than this. And he began to teach God's people how easy it was to walk with God. How that they could have what they want, they could do what they want, and they could do it with whom they want, because let us live and let live. And this was Nicholas. His meetings got up into, historically, his meetings got up into in between 75 and 100,000 people before his demise. But he began to lure God's people away from worshiping him. But that was Nicholas. Now Jehoshaphat, what he did was he became a business partner of Ahaziah. Look at verse 36. It says here, in verse 36, he says, together they built a fleet of trading ships at the port of Ezon-Geber. Verse 37, then Eleazar, the son of Dodavah from Mareshah, prophesied against Jehoshaphat. He said, because you have allied yourself with King Ahaziah, the Lord will destroy your work. Now notice here. Notice, and he said, well, you know, this wouldn't happen to a believer. No, wait a minute. This had nothing to do with spirituality. This had everything to do with the law of sowing and reaping. Remember this. The law of sowing and reaping does not bow to grace. And here he said that the Lord will destroy your work. So now notice here, this is just history now, what it says next. It says there, so the ships met with disaster and never put out to sea. They never went to sail. Those ships, that business, how he became a business partner, was all destroyed. Now, some people may have thought, well, gosh, it was just a horrible storm that actually came and really kind of destroyed Jehoshaphat's works, because Jehoshaphat's a really good guy. No, what really matters is that when you build your life team, your life is only as strong as your weakest friend. The same as a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, your life is only as strong as the weakest person that you call friend. So the second thing is that if I'm going to be successful, what I need to do is I need to build a life team. And what our principle is in the second is this: a life without a harvest is proof that I've invested in the wrong people. There are right people for your life, and there are wrong people for your life. Remember, there are no do-overs in life. Life is filled with difficult choices. It's filled with hard things to do. And if I want to be successful at anything I do, I need to understand that my character and the people around me are the two most important things that I have to face off with. Number three is this, is that a person, if I'm going to be successful, I must remain humble. Now, understand this. Many people have false humility. This false humility has to do with, they're actually arrogant is really what they are. And they say, oh, no, that really wasn't me. And we would call that humility, but it's not. It's actually arrogance. And so we need to understand that the light of heaven shines brightly upon those who've chosen humility of heart. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse number 2, the Bible says, when pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble, there is wisdom. Proverbs chapter 16, verse number 19, it says,
if you are in the Chicago area, we would love for you to join any of our services. We have a 5 p.m. service on Saturdays, and on Sundays we have a 9:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. service. We also have midweek services on Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. at locations around Chicago and Northwest Indiana. To find out more about FHC, like us on Facebook or go to our website at fhclife.org. To partner with RTM, visit robthompson.org/partner or call our office at 708-614-6000. We look forward to seeing you very soon.